for joining us and having us. My name is JJ Powell. I'm PM, project manager in the Walsh Construction in Seattle. We're going to be presenting a little bit of an overview and a case study to you today on cost-efficient design and construction. Again, myself, I've been 11 years at Walsh. Really love the process of developing projects and working with teams like with Eric at LIHI, and working with architects and engineers to bring construction projects to reality. Just a quick note, Walsh is a Northwest regional general contractor. We have offices in 4 different cities, but we serve kind of all of Oregon, Washington area. We've gone a little further afield as well.
And hey,
Sure.
My name's Eric Blank. I'm with the Low Income Housing Institute. I'm an architect. I've been designing multifamily structures in Seattle for the last 20 odd years. I joined LIHI, who was my favorite client 6 years ago. And my role is design manager and construction manager. I oversee the design process and construction. I help with site acquisitions all the way through operations. LIHI was founded in '91. We're an affordable housing developer with new construction all over the Northwest, mostly in the I-5 corridor, but we go into 6 different counties. We've currently got over 2,000 apartments on 60 sites, and we develop them and then we operate them. So these are long-term holds for us.
All right, sorry, unmuting. So today what we're going to do is, like I said, provide an overview of our an initiative that Walsh has termed Cost Efficient Design and Construction, CEDC. It's going to be a pretty high-flying overview. It's not entirely about just CEDC. We're going to be providing the basic concepts, some best practices for achieving cost-efficient methods, and we're going to also present a case study of a recently completed project in Seattle that Walsh, Runberg Architects, and LIHI all worked on together. To kind of introduce the whole concept of CEDC, it's an initiative that started in our Oregon region. Mike Steffen, as some folks may have seen presentations with Mike previously, Passive House and CEDC as well. Started with a project that Anchor Moisen was involved with, and Reach Development in our Oregon region. And we piloted the concepts that we're going to be presenting on 4 different projects throughout the region. And there's lots of other projects right now in pre-construction with LIHI and others, and also by Walsh and others. So the concepts that we're talking about today have really kind of spread throughout the Northwest and beyond. And they're really pretty straightforward and simple, but it's kind of putting things together in an intent approach. So why focus on cost-efficient design and construction? Why focus on efficiency? As we all know that there are a lot of uncertainties and pressures on affordable housing. There's also a mandate in many areas to really push affordable housing to the forefront and really prioritize building more housing at all levels and all scales. The goal in general is to address these challenges proactively, and get more out of our project designs, more out of the budgets. Build a repertoire of strategies, build a baseline of guidelines to implement on a variety of different types of projects. Primarily, we're working on multifamily, and that's what we're here to talk about today. CEDC kind of builds on a couple of different primary concepts. One is we like to call it kind of this 80-20 concept. But in terms of budget and actually physical building, they're about 80% of the building, in our view, should be really standardized and optimized. It's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of budget and schedule, and in terms of moving the needle in cost and schedule. We really want to standardize essentially those basic building blocks of the projects we are engaged in as much as possible, so that we can, gain some room, either schedule or budget wise, to customize other aspects of the project, and really let those areas of the project that are, experienced by operators and residents, really let those be customized, really upgraded, improved in terms of performance, or durability, or experience. Creating a new amenity space, or high efficiency performance design. I mentioned building blocks. In the multifamily world, the unit plan is really the basic driver of building massing and building layout. And our goal here is to really standardize, really simplify, reduce complexity in the unit plan. First and foremost, that's really kind of the place where we want to drive as much as possible. That will really contribute to the overall massing and kind of layout and setup of your project. Gain efficiencies in terms of reduce wasted space in the unit. Really eliminate sort of nowhere spaces. You're neither here, you're neither there. Eliminate corners as much as possible, reduce structural loads, simplify mechanical layouts and locations. One thing I'd like to point out, and these are a couple of standard 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom unit plans in our repertoire templates. A lot of the mechanical is going to, in our multifamily building, is going to exist along the corridor. We'd like to really kind of build on that concept, the complex, stacking elements that are, infrastructural and structural should be, really kind of concentrated around the core of the building, or what we like to call the chassis or the armature, kind of right along the spine of the corridor. And that's where you could call it the expensive aspects of the square footage are. And out here in the living spaces, the bedroom and the living areas, might be a lot less expensive square footage. So standardizing and optimizing as much as possible in those, that 80% of the building, kind of the infrastructural and structural aspects, so that you can then, really improve and add to that 20%. So just a few kind of basic concepts for unit plans. A minimal number of unit plan types, that's what we really strive for. Stacking units, standardizing kitchen and bath designs. We really strive to reduce the numbers of types of kitchens and bathrooms. If a plumber can walk in and know that the bathroom in this unit is just like every other bathroom down the hall, it might be located slightly differently, maybe. Or there might be some unique condition to the unit plan, but there's an element of reliability there. Narrow widths, reducing envelope and circulation. Gonna go down to a couple of these. Rooms sized on a 2-foot dimension to optimize framing materials. If you think about it, framing materials, a lot of our materials come in, 2-foot dimensional modules. And, being able to really kind of think about those modules that you are purchasing off the shelf, if you can minimize waste, you're literally you're maximizing your potential in the kind of material usage there. Here's a good example is, in our Oregon region, we've really pushed this quite heavily, going to advanced framing concepts using a 2-foot module, laying out our windows on 2-foot increments. It really increases the reliability of stacking materials and stacking bearing conditions And you know, from an engineering standpoint, you're really talking about less wood in the wall. You can see, you know, if you kind of squint a little bit, it's kind of hard to see. But if you look, you can see there's a lot less studs in that unit plan right there than what you might see in a typical standard framing layout. This is from our CEDC manual. This is a study of sectional floor-to-floor height. Another item that we've really focused on is, you know, not just the plan layout, but the floor-to-floor heights. We want to optimize materials for purchasing plywood and studs. You know, looking at specifically being able to lay out the elevation of the ceiling and the floor plate to optimize for 2 sheets of drywall. So you can stack 2 sheets of drywall and not have to cut the drywall on the horizontal. We've seen, you know, an 8'2" ceiling height, which essentially means that you have a 2-foot cut around the entire room. That takes time. It takes time and it creates waste. And what we've seen is if we can, you know, optimize some of these areas where we can just reduce the amount of material handling, reduce the labor involved, that we can achieve a lot of savings in terms of schedule and cost. Some basic building layout concepts that are promoted by CEDC. Just generally reducing, you know, kind of unnecessary articulation. And it's not to say that we don't want to keep, you don't want to take some character out of the building. In fact, when we show you George Fleming Place, I think I'd argue there's a ton of character in that building design. But you know, places where you may not see it or experience it. At George Fleming, for example, we'll talk about it a little bit later. We were able to reduce. We thickened the post-tension concrete deck a bit, so it was the second floor, and we thickened it up a little bit. We added some material, but what we did was we eliminated any drop soffits in the concrete slab, and what that meant was we were simplifying that concrete slab, and we took about 4 or 5 days out of the schedule, just in that design move right there. It made the construction fly. It's not something it's going to get covered up by a ceiling, but it lent real benefits to the project in terms of budget and schedule that could then be, you know, applied elsewhere in the project budget.
And JJ, I'll just add that when we're talking about modulation or bay windows on the exterior of the building, the CEDC principle is that you take that down to structural concrete, or you take that down to something that can support it, and not try to hang the bays out, you know, wood level where you have to do some kind of gymnastics to get it to support. Absolutely, yeah. That's a great point, Eric. Stacking. I mean, if you want to modulate the building facade, go for it. Especially in wood, though, you want to stack those elements so that they bear all the way down to a solid bearing element. You know, cantilevers, we generally say avoid structural cantilevers if possible on balconies, canopies, and trellises. I mean, you know, elements like this require additional structure to support them. So if you are going to do it, find an opportune place to do so. In many of our projects in Seattle, you know, 5/1 or 5/2, or now 6/1, where we have a concrete, elevated concrete post-tension deck. That's an opportune place to do an overhang, because the concrete is kind of doing double duty there, and you're not trying to make the wood do something it's not meant to do. You know, carry 5 stories of load, you know, having to introduce steel and that sort of thing. So yeah, a post-tension deck is a great place to do that overhang. So on to the case study, and just a little bit about project team. LIHI and Walsh have worked together for a long time. We've worked with Runberg on many of those projects together. 3 firms have
have a rapport that's been established over all those projects, and you know, I think a lot of trust built between team members and the firms. And you know, this seemed like a really a great opportunity. Also, given some of the pressures that the project was facing from a funding standpoint, seemed like a great opportunity to jump in into the pool, into the deep end, and just go for it. And it was a team that was willing to innovate and really willing to push the envelope
Also,
here.
add a couple of things. The photo is not George Fleming Place, right? That's on Locke, which is another building we've done with Walsh and Runberg, and that's LIHI's flagship. Our office is in the ground floor there in Seattle. But I'll also say that making George Fleming Place this was an opportunity for proof of concept with the CEDC principles that we were all really excited about. And when we were applying for our public funding, we actually made that part of our pitch, that this was the team that was going to get the most bang for the buck and prove out some of these concepts, and we were really confident about it. That made us more attractive to public funders. And they were watching the project all the way through, and it's become kind of a model for how affordable housing is developed in Seattle.
Indeed. Thanks, Brad. That's great points. So just some basic project stats about George Fleming Place. 106 apartments, up to 60% AMI. A pretty wide mix of unit types. I will side note and say that that wide mix really allowed us, although I said standardize, that wide mix did allow us to do a few little gymnastics, as you saw with our unit or our floor plan layout, and utilize more of that project site, because we had a couple of different rectangle types to use. But again, standardizing those and keeping the widths pretty reasonable. Amenities, we've got a community media room on the ground floor. There's a large ground floor courtyard and patio area, a really beautiful spot there for residents. Shared laundries on every floor. And then, as you can see in the photo here on the corner, a top floor community room deck. That used to be a unit, but we were able to find the room in the budget and the design to be able to convert that into a really great space. And I would argue a market rate amenity for this great project for the residents. Funding sources, city, county, and 4% tax credit funding, bonds. So fairly typical, fairly reasonable. Like, we understand what that means in terms of funding opportunities, but also challenges and pressures. So the project came back to us. There was an estimate effort in 2018 that we'll talk a little bit about, and went in for initial funding consideration back in 2018. Came back around to us all, and we all sat around the table discussing the opportunities and challenges presented by CEDC to bring the project to reality, to address essentially a $2 million funding gap. So first and foremost, we had to help LIHI and everyone get this project funded. So reducing costs by $2 million. That was out of the gate a first goal. In order to do so, we found an opportunity in potentially swapping out one of the concrete floors with wood instead of concrete. It did allow us to save quite a bit of money. And we essentially needed to evaluate this new type of construction in Seattle called Type 3A, being used for 6-story wood frame buildings. So we would have a 6-story wood frame building on top of a concrete Type 1A space. And then just increasing the unit yield on a challenging site. And Eric will kind of show you what that looks like in a little bit here. In terms of results, the building layout was reconfigured using the concepts out of CEDC. The unit count went from 93 units to 106. The second floor, as I said, was revised from concrete to wood frame. And again, out of the gate, we were able to achieve that financial goal and get the project to a place where it could be, could proceed. So we were able to go from 24.8 to $22.4 million over the course of that exercise. Eric?
Yeah, our moderators told us there's a 10-second lag between when we click the slide and when you guys see them. So
funny. Okay.
But what you're looking at, what we'll be looking at in a second, is floor plans before and after. On the left is the original schematic design layout from 2018, which we just talked about, and you can see that it started off as a, it had good bones. This is a simple double-loaded corridor bar building. It has a kind of a kink in it, or a bend in it because we had a regular shaped property, and the architects wanted to express that with this kind of gasket knuckle in between them. But both of the building volumes on both sides are rectangular, right? We have no funky angles that we're trying to build out of wood. It's the gap in between that you're seeing. And actually those hashed areas, that was a diagram looking at something else, or this is from a diagram, but those are, open air. Those were open air. So it was really just the corridor that was taking up that knuckle. Units were, well, pretty right-sized. We were looking at, they were gracious, but that was nothing out of line. And we were already looking at furniture layouts and seeing how the space was going to be used. On the right is the kind of final floor plan, and I'll point out a few opportunities. Again, we went from 93 units to 106. We did that mostly by getting kind of lean and mean, or kind of trimming the fat on the units themselves. So we found that instead of fewer bigger units, we could do smaller, more smaller units. We took the opportunity to regularize those too. We also found the opportunity to create a U-shaped building, and that allowed us to use more of this irregular shaped site. The reason we didn't originally, I think of the U-shape is those typically create really weird inside corners where you lose a lot of square footage, and that was solved by, putting the services at the corners and, again, leaving some gaps. But if you look at those units, we got it down to very few unit types, and but I guess I'll also point out that it's not, the CEDC principles and those floor plans that JJ was pointing out at the beginning, those are starting points. What we did here was, it's custom designed by the architect, and even though we got the unit plans down, there were still, exceptions to the rules. So the corner unit, that 2-bedroom on the top right, that's a special unit because that was creating a special, expression on the outside. So it's bang for the buck. And you can see where we're using the 20%. I also just want to point out that this project, didn't start as CEDC. This was kind of retrofitted after SD. And we were still able to save $2 million. So, when you start from scratch, it's even more efficient.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you really nailed something there when you said, the unit plans are a starting point. I mean, we'd love to just use the unit plans in CEDC, but at the same time, there are there's reality and there are real conditions. There are C-shaped, oddly unsymmetrical, diagonal C-shaped property, lines that we have to deal with sometimes. But you notice these are all rectangles. There's no real, there's a bunch of rectangles just in this property and using it pretty well. And Runberg really took them to heart and made them their own. LIHI really took the process to heart. Part of this effort, as we mentioned before, part of the effort is not just about what the design team is doing and what LIHI did and what Walsh is doing, but it's really involving trades. It's really going to the trade experts, the people who are going to be working on the site, and asking them, hey, what works and what doesn't work out there? If you were king designer of this project, what would you do? And you know, we got quite a bit of feedback from all of the subs that were involved in the pre-construction effort. Eric, do you want to?
Yeah, I want to say that in addition to the MEP guys coming to the table, what I think was really special on this one was the framer and the drywall guy. But specifically, I know the framer, we did a really cool exercise where the structural engineer was optimizing for material. And so he was looking at only using 11 7/8 TJIs when he needed it, trying to use 9.5 TJIs elsewhere and some other lumber that were, you know, smaller, and creating, you know, adjusting the spacing, and, you know, was a really efficient structural design and really only using material where we needed it. When the framer looked at that and just said, this is way too complicated, just keep it simple, right? And and just told us, and it was also the guy who was going to be building it. So really valuable input, where if we just, you know, we ended up changing to all 11 7/8 TJIs at, you know, regular spacing. We did the same kind of thing with the different wall types on the corridors. He's like, just, you know, don't change it every 10 feet. I just need to be able to send my guys up there and they just know what to do. So that was just really interesting. It's not always going to be like that. I think that was, you know, this particular guy on this particular project, especially now that, you know, material costs are out of control with the pandemic. So something that each team needs to look at, but it was surprising to us, and it was just super valuable, you know, in design development early on in you know, in DD, to be able to proceed with certainty and know that we were going to get a good bid.
So some of the results, just some examples of results that we saw from that SD timeframe through to the GMP. I'm not going to read all of these, and you can read them on your own a little bit, but I'm going to read some of the results. You know, by getting that input from the tradespeople, the experts, you know, we were able to save a substantial amount, and this is really the contribution to that overall savings, right? Not only were we able to make budgetary, you know, strides, but in terms of benefits to the construction process itself, what was produced was just a cleaner, safer site. It was a cleaner, more efficient, more, you know, logically planned process to build this building. Many people said that this was their favorite job to come to. You know, they literally loved coming to the job site. You can see that, you know, that we shaved 15 days off the construction schedule, the concrete construction schedule. We shaved 18 days off of the wood framing timeframe. The plumber and the drywaller kept up just fine. No unforeseen issues. You know, in terms of, you know, costs on site, it was all within budget. In fact, I just sent a deductive change order back to LIHI yesterday, but it felt good. It felt really good to be able to reduce costs all the way along from SD to GMP, and do it with the input of the tradespeople and the folks that are you know, the guys that are out there, and they know that their office actually participated in this process. It was a really rewarding aspect of it. So what does that integrated design look like? Eric mentioned a lot of it, just bringing the sub team to the table, you know, bringing the plumber, bringing the HVAC electrician, you know, not just bringing, you know, design build subcontractors on board, but we actually brought elevator provider who was selected at DD. We brought the wood framer, as Eric mentioned. We brought the drywaller, metal framer. All these subs were selected competitively at design development, and were held to a standard. And, you know, they had to perform, but they also had to hold their budget at least, and had to improve upon their budget if possible. And they gave input all the way along. We tested out materials and confirmed, you know, some of the assumptions, and we confirmed some of our assumptions were bad in some cases, as it related to this specific project. asking the trades, how would they improve efficiency? What would they do to reduce the upfront cost, but also just those unforeseens, all the potential changes during construction, right? And they had a seat at the table along with primary team members. They were considered part of the design team, really. In addition to that, we engage in a lot of what we call value engineering, right, on many projects, but it's really more of a mindset of thinking about how do we flip the spec and think about add alternates instead of deduct alternates. A good example, thinking about value and putting value back into the project. Here you see, this is kind of one of our last, budget control logs. So there's a lot of furnishings in here, a lot of finishes, because we'd already done a lot of the work on the structure, but I thought these were good examples. These are all basically durable upgrades to the project that we wanted to get through the soils and underground. As long as we got through the soils and underground pretty well, we had the rest of the project figured out, and we were able to add a lot of these back in very early on in the project timeframe. And again, it's about performance, durability, experience, good quality materials, and being able to add those back in. That's a great feeling as a general contractor to be able to do that, not have to cut out those aspects of the job because we have to get under the budgetary wire.
Can I also say, from an owner's perspective, it's super useful to have these alternates priced at the beginning, so that these were bid with the project. And then we basically had these prices pretty much locked in. And sometimes, so this is kind of the discipline of CEDC, where you go in low. So you go in low and then you can add in the kind of the sizzle or the optional things later.
Yeah, baseline.
And that baseline being low is really great because you kind of know that you have the problem solved. And you don't get into a situation where you have to VE later and you kind of forget all the things that you've baked in and that might not be priorities. So what we did as an owner team was go through, like some of these things that make a more durable project or just a nicer looking project for our residents. And we were able to prioritize those or deprioritize those against things that we really needed to do. Mm-hmm. So it just gives us, it gives us a lot more flexibility, reminds us of our priorities throughout the project. And I don't know, super useful.
Just a brief chat about design assist or design build for MEP. This project used a design build approach from the get-go. So we didn't have a basis of design engineer from the outside. We had essentially qualifications and interviews and a proposal. We asked them, how much should this project cost? How should it be designed based on LIHI's outline specs and their requirements, and based on the project that they see in front of them. And we made qualitative choices in addition to quantitative choices up front. And we just said, look, this is where we're going to start, like Eric said, with a baseline. You really want to define those terms of participation early, and really think about what that's going to look like from design through construction, and really integrating foremen, really integrating the folks that are going to be leading in the field, to be able to understand the decisions that are made upstream in design, so that those decisions aren't reworked again and rethought of, and are really carried out. Like Eric said, more schedule and budget certainty in pre-con with the design build. Just basically, gaining that certainty, which is hard to get these days, and it's really achievable if you involve those folks at the table. So again, besides reducing cost, I talked a little bit about some of the construction benefits. There are a lot. I could go on for a long time about this. Just the fact that there's quite a bit of freed budget for add backs, limited change orders, our bid set to construction set change orders total, when you're incorporating all of the ads from the permit review and all of that stuff, was $8,000. Frequently, that's many tens of thousands of dollars, if not $100,000 or more. And that was just a real success for all of us. We felt, that meant that we were transitioning to construction confidently. Reduced waste. So down in the lower right-hand corner, that's that full sheet of drywall module I was talking about. The laborer for the drywaller couldn't believe that we meant to do that. He said, "There's no way you meant to do that." And he said, "Yeah, no, we really meant to do that." We had about half the waste that we would typically have on a project for drywall.
JJ, we've got to wrap up, so we have time for questions.
Okay. Well, we can wrap up here. We can just a real quick note about change order breakdown. I think this is a pretty good story. You can imagine what the project would look like if COVID hadn't happened, but you can also imagine replacing COVID with some other unforeseen challenge, whether it's additional bad soils or there's some other issue. By going through the effort to make the project more efficient from a design standpoint and to be able to make construction more affordable and more feasible. We really not only gave it an opportunity for LIHI to select, value upgrades and durable upgrades, but we really were able to, as a team, absorb, the challenges of the pandemic, and the supply chain issues, the lumber problem, all of those issues, came to a head. We never once had an on-site meeting for this project. We did the whole thing during the pandemic. And I just, again, gave them back money. We finished the project a month early. I'm confident we would have had a hard time doing so had we not gone through those efforts. It was a benefit to everyone and a benefit to the schedule and the whole process. So I think we could probably end here, with some thoughts from Eric on moving forward.
Do we have the pretty picture?
Oh, yeah, we do. I think
It's
so.
not on the pretty picture.
Oh, darn it.
Oh, maybe we don't. That's close enough.
Well, there's a picture. There's a pretty picture.
That's fine. So yeah, we just want to, I just say to designers, this is a definition of quality design, which is keeping it simple, not spending money and where you don't need it, and then you have conversations about where you want to spend the money. And you can see from the exterior, we did spend money on sunshades and modulation and storefront canopies and all kinds of secondary, and tertiary features. And we were able to do that because we solved the problems cheaply. I think we're ready for questions.
Hi, this is Claire and I'm the moderator, and let me see if I can go ahead and read some of the questions. One of them was about soundproofing, and the person who was asking about this says that this is a construction element that some developers are skipping on, as if noise pollution isn't something low income and market rate residents should be shielded from. Any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I can answer that. It's not something that we do. What's cool about affordable housing is that there's many things that I enjoy about developing affordable housing. One is that the powers that be require, if they put any kind of federal money into it, they require that it is soundproofed on the exterior. So because this was, this project is close to a very busy arterial to the west with light rail and traffic. So we do have upgraded windows. We have lower U values on our windows. And that was something else that was a project requirement, but also something that we wanted to do. And then internally, we also, we hired an acoustical consultant. So we have all of our wall types dialed in and close to market rate.
Concur.
Soundproofing, yeah.
Everything
And
Eric said.
we also have a question. Can you speak to CDC principles, CEDC principles as they pertain to structured parking? Is there structured parking at George Fleming?
There is not. No, this is a slab on grade building with no structured parking. You can do that in CDC building. I mean, we have buildings that we're working on now that have garages. And, you know, again, I would just say, you know, I would look at that transition from the garage to the, you know, the upper floors and look at stacking elements, looking at your column layouts, bearing layouts, that sort of thing. And you approach it from kind of what does the building want to do from a structural standpoint, from a, you know, not trying to force it to do something it doesn't want to do. You know, we don't want to do acrobatics with rebar in a slab to transfer load from one place to another. We want to, you know, make those columns and those footings as efficient as possible and reduce cost as much as possible through those means.
Another question is, please explain single stud party walls.
Oh, I can.
Yeah, that goes back to the acoustic question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean, maybe you've done this. I don't know.
yeah. So basically, what we're able to do is it's a single 2x6 on a 2x6 plate. And what we had done, I guess I'll point out that, you know, typically before we really dialed in CEDC, we were doing more of a typical, you know, foot wide demising wall that was, you know, a double stud with a maybe, you know, 2x4s with a 1-inch airspace, or a 2x6 and a 2x4 with a 1-inch airspace, making like a foot or a 14-inch wide sandwich. When we're dialing in these small units, we've been able to do, the single studs. We solve the acoustics by doing, you know, we make sure that we are just doing single shear. So we avoid the need for double shear walls with our architectural and structural design. And then we put a resilient channel on the on one side. Where we have, you know, if you have cabinets that have to pin onto that, we've been able to put Homosote soundboard in between the RC, and we can screw right into that. So it's a way to get secure cabinets on the RC side without defeating the RC. It does not perform as well as the double stud with the airspace, but it's plenty.
We've had some wall types. We had this particular wall type that we used. We had it tested at Kelso, and it performed better than code. So
it's definitely better than code. Yeah,
it's better than code. It's a good wall type. You know, from a construction standpoint, it allowed us, if you think about it, it allowed us to frame half the walls. You know, half the number of walls that we might typically frame. We're not putting up 2 walls right next to each other. We're putting up 1. And then the drywaller is putting on that RC channel, that resilient channel later. So we get to the roof faster. We get the roof on faster. And we're able to dry in sooner.
And the single stud buys us 4 inches of space,
Indeed.
You know, at every wall. So that's just super valuable and lets us get, you know, bigger, you know, more and more units in.
Another question was simply, what's the total square footage for George Fleming?
93,000, I believe.
This image is a little weird because there's an adjacent. So George Fleming ends at the gray.
Right, yeah.
The white building is is the building next door. And then there's another one beyond that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Another question in the chat is, how do you manage large families without parking?
It's a good question.
That is a good question.
The context here is in Seattle. In Seattle, there has been the parking requirement got reduced, and so I mean, if you're because this project is on transit, because it's so close to public transit, it's allowed, and it's on that corridor, it's allowed to have no parking. And there's a lot of context in Seattle about that. What we find is that so, you know, most families are using public transit. There's also ample street parking. We had to do We had to do
Parking study,
parking
yeah.
studies, traffic impact analysis of parked cars and stuff.
Mhm.
But the real problem in this context too of the CEDC, I mean, underground parking, Walsh, what do you guys, what is it, 50K per stall? It's something
Well,
like,
it's more than that. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
for like
probably,
underground parking.
yeah.
Yeah, so,
It all depends on what you find in the ground.
right. So
Also.
for us, it's about, we have, limited public resources that wants us spending it on, housing people.
Mhm.
And the traffic, there's just other ways to deal with the cars.
Well, you can't see right behind here, and you can see to the left is it's MLK in Seattle, and that's where Othello Station is, the light rail station, and there's this bus and light rail back there. There's a park right across the street to the right.
Yep.
Huge park. It's quite a bit right in this little neighborhood.
And that's not by accident. I mean, LIHI selects properties that are close to public transit and walkable amenities so that people don't have to have the car.
Yeah, the Safeway's right there too.
Safeway's right across diagonally across.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Let's see here. Sandy Miller asks, I probably missed it, but when did Walsh join the team?
Well,
So,
we were actually on back in 2018. We started with the project. I think I looked back as far as maybe right after conceptual kicked off back in spring of 2018, maybe. And we were we provided the estimate in 2018 for that initial funding estimate. So coming back in 2019, in the spring of 2019, after funding results initial funding results were announced, we just jumped right back on board. We all kind of showed up to a meeting and picked up where we left off.
But this is another decision that LIHI has made of bringing the contractor on early on. So it is more upfront cost. JJ alluded to that in the presentation. It's more upfront cost with pre-con, but what it gives us is budget certainty and better bids.
Mm-hmm.
And we use that to be more competitive and have less risk, because especially when we're a nonprofit developer with public funds, we go and ask for funds and then it's, we have to hold to that budget. It's very hard for us to go back and get more money without good reason.
Absolutely.
AJ, can you flash our contact info up?
Sure.
Or
My
that.
apologies. Or that was pretty. There's our contact info. Myself, Becky Bicknell, our business development manager, and Eric Blank's contact info. And we do have white papers and info available for anyone. And perhaps Claire, I could follow up with you guys, you and Matt, to make that available. Becky wanted me to throw a plug in here for HDC's Exemplary Building Task Force guidelines, the integrated design guidelines that we helped put together. There's a lot of cross-pollination here between CEDC and Exemplary Building Task Force, just kind of what's going on there. You'll see it throughout the market and the region. There's a lot of people talking about this stuff, and that's another great resource for people.
Everybody's trying to do more with less.
It's the theme of the moment.
Well, it's going to be more than the moment. Yeah.
well, I want to thank you both for presenting. We're just about at our end. This was a session that I really wanted to see at this conference, because when I toured this project, I was so excited by it. And I want to make sure that we all had a chance, particularly as funders, to take a look at it, but also everybody involved in the affordable housing process. So I think we're wrapping up now, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thanks for having us.